Welcome back to our course on PSE 15. In this section we're going to look at filters in PSE 15. I've mentioned filters a few times already, we've even used them once or twice, but in this section we're going to look at the application of filters in quite a bit more detail. Filters are used to clean up and retouch pictures. You can very often use them to disguise problems, for example, but you can also produce some pretty impressive effects using filters. The first thing to mention is that there are so many filters in PSE 15, well over 100 now, that it just wouldn't be practical for me to go through all of them and demonstrate and explain what each of them does. However, in the Elements PDF there is a good description of the filters, and if you want to have a scan through, read what they do, try them out, I suggest that's a very good place to start. What I am going to demonstrate here though, apart from a few examples of filters, is the main ways of applying filters to your images in PSE 15. The PDF says there are 3 ways of doing it, which is true. There's actually a 4th way, and the 4th way is that you can apply filters using layers. But I'm going to start by concentrating on the other 3. All 3 of them are described in the PDF. Again, I suggest that you refer to the PDF section on filters and work your way through it. But let me start by demonstrating the filter menu. If I click on the filter menu, the top entry here says difference clouds. Yours may well say nothing at all there. That is the last filter that was applied, and the last filter that I've applied is difference clouds. So that's a very straightforward way of getting at the most recent filter you've applied, and of course applying it again. The second entry gives you access to the filter gallery that we're going to come back to in a moment. The next one is correct camera distortion, which I'm not going to cover here. And then we have a list of the categories of filter, and in each category there are a number of filters, and these correspond to the filters that are listed and described in the PDF. The bottom option there is Digimark. You may or may not have heard of Digimark. It's a digital watermarking technology and the name of a company as well. So if you need to copyright your images, I suggest you look into Digimark. It is supported by PSE 15, and although I'm not going to go into it in detail on this course, as I say, if copyright is important to you, I suggest you follow that up. We're really going to concentrate here on these main categories of filters and a couple of the examples of filters within those categories. Let's look at a straightforward example of a filter. Let's look at one of the blur filters. Gaussian blur is a very commonly used filter, and as with many of the filters you will get a little dialog that lets you control the level of the filter. In the case of Gaussian blur, for example, the main setting is a radius setting which defaults to 1 pixel, and you can see a little zoomed in preview of part of the bridge in this image showing you the effect of the blur. Now you have zoom in and zoom out buttons where you can investigate the effect of the blur as you vary the radius of the blur as well. So if I increase the radius quite a bit, you can see how blurred that is becoming. And then of course if I get it up to really what is an extremely blurred level, click on OK so that it's applied to the whole image, that really has achieved a high level of blur. As I mentioned a couple of times earlier on in the course, we might apply this though to part of an image, or we might apply it via a layer with a layer mask so that we could blur part of the image and not another part. So the general principles related to selections, masks and so on all apply to the application of filters. And as an example of a completely different sort of filter, if I go up to the adjustments and go to photo filter, I could apply one of the photo filters that we used earlier on in the course via a layer, the warming filter in this case, and I can increase the density of the filter. Look carefully at the image now. I'll just click on OK, and that's the effect of the warming filter on this image. As always, of course, I have undo available. In some cases, when you select a filter for the menu, you're automatically taken to the filter gallery. So let's look at the filter gallery option next. One of the great advantages of using the filter gallery is that you can apply more than one filter at a time, and you can experiment with many combinations of filters. In effect, this filter is a very large dialog. You have a large size preview on the left. You then have a second panel which enables you to select filters. It's not all of the available filters in PSE 15, but it's all the ones that you can use in this way. And then on the right you have a filter bin, and as you select filters to apply to the image, you can add them to the bin, remove them from the bin, change the order of the filters in the bin, and so on. Let's start by applying one of the artistic filters. I'm going to apply Fresco. You'll see a preview. It usually takes a little while for the preview to come up because it's usually the case that PSE has a lot to do. With each of these filters there is usually a set of controls, often a set of sliders as I have here, where I can experiment with the various settings. So for instance, let me change the brush size here on the Fresco filter. Now even if I'm making what appears to be a relatively small change to these settings, it can take a while for PSE to prepare or update the preview. So let me increase the brush size. Look at the little progress bar on the bottom left there. That'll tell you how far it's got with updating the preview. Now having done that, you can see that Fresco is in the bin on the right. What I'm now going to do is to add a new effect layer. That in this case means a new filter. So with that little button down at the bottom, I click on that. Notice that it's given me another Fresco, which may seem a bit strange, but I'm going to change that just by selecting a different sort of filter. So I'm going to go to brush strokes and I'm going to change it to angled strokes. Notice that's changed the newly added filter, and in fact it'll change whichever one I have selected in the bin there. So what I've now got is a composite filter. I've got both Fresco and angled strokes, and I actually quite like that. The picture's a little bit dark, but the effect I think is rather good. Very often the order of filters does make a significant difference to the appearance of the resulting image. And one thing you can do, for example, supposing I wanted to change the sequence here of Fresco and angled strokes. If I select Fresco, say, and pull it up above angled strokes, that changes the order. You can see the progress bar at the bottom left, and you may or may not see a noticeable difference in the resulting preview. I think you'll agree that that's quite different from the preview that I had before. So there's plenty to experiment with there in the filter gallery. Let's take a look at the third way of applying filters. The third way of applying filters is very straightforward because there is a filters panel in PSE 15. Bring that up and I have filters categorized, and I can apply the filters in a very straightforward way by just selecting one, for instance Fresco, and applying it. Note that I get those same slider controls that I had in the filter gallery, and I can adjust the sliders, and I've got a commit button and a cancel button as well. So that's a pretty straightforward option. And one final point here, I mentioned earlier the option of applying filters by layers. You don't have the full range of filters if you use layers, but there are certainly some that you can apply. So let me click here on photo filter, and I can choose from one of the available photo filters, and in applying that, not only do I get a new layer so that it's easy to switch on or switch off this effect, but by the use of a layer mask I can be very specific about which areas of the image the filter is applied to. That's it for this section. Please join me in the next one.